Hey, is this thing on? Hello? Hit it again. I think it's on now. Welcome to Hiker Trash Radio, where each week, Doc will drag some colorful characters out of the woods to talk trail and Type 2 fun. If you're aspiring hiker trash, or if you're just looking to understand the hiker trash in your life, look no further. So lace up those boots, gnaw on some jerky, and settle into your 20-mile pace as we fire up the podcast from somewhere deep in the backcountry. It's time to embrace the suck.
All right, welcome back to another week on the trail. Dirtbags, hiker trash, and of course, good-smelling day hikers. I'm Doc, and this is Hiker Trash Radio. Hey, if you like what we're doing here, take just a minute to help us out. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. And if you don't like what we're doing, well, just go ahead and keep that to yourself. All right, let's get to this week's guest, a long-distance section hiker, peak bagger, and outdoor advocate, Stacia Bennett. How's it going, Stacia?
Hey, Doc, I'm doing pretty good. Just getting settled into a new state and a new campground for a new work contract after a whirlwind couple of months off to do some adventuring. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing fantastic. I've been doing work around the house all morning, so this is a welcome relief from the tasks at hand. So thank you so much. And you know what? Looking at your background, is that a virtual background or is that actually the inside of a camper?
No, this is actually the inside of a camper. I don't live in a camper full time all the time, but I do live in a camper about 8 to 10 months out of the year whenever I'm on travel contract. So.
Travel contract. Okay. We're going to dig into that a little bit later. That sounds intriguing to me. But first, let's talk about the fact that we usually go by trail names here on the podcast. So Doc is not on my driver's license or on my paychecks, but that's what we go by here on the podcast. Have you picked up a trail name along the way, Stacia?
Yeah, I got my trail name in 2015 before my first attempt at hiking the Appalachian Trail.
And what is your trail name?
My trail name is Tinkerbell. Most of my friends and trail family just call me Tink.
Okay, and how did you come by Tinkerbell?
I think people always want some like really super funny or epic story about how you get a trail name, and I just really don't have one of those. I wanted to hike the Appalachian Trail in 2015, and in the early part of the year, I was stuck in a graduate program. I was getting a master's degree, and I was tied up in a research assistantship at a pretty major university. So I could not get on the AT in March or April when I wanted to, and I was itching to get out there. So I spent my weekends out doing trail magic. I went to college in Georgia, and so I was pretty close to the Georgia and North Carolina sections of the AT, and I go out and do section hikes and shakedown hikes to dial my gear in for when I could finally get on the trail. And in that process, doing trail magic at the different gaps and road crossings in Georgia and North Carolina, I met a lot of northbound through hikers that would be kind of my cohort once I finally got on trail. And in Franklin, North Carolina, at Winding Stair Gap, I provided some memorable trail magic to a group of northbound hikers, and they started calling me their trail fairy. And one of them was like, "We're going to name you Tinkerbell." And I was like, "Absolutely not. You're not naming me Tinkerbell." I refused. And then a week or so later, I was on trail doing another section hike, hiking up toward Waya Bald, and a hiker passed me and turned around and looked at me funny and said, "Hey, are you Tinkerbell?" And anyway, it just followed me after that, and I haven't been able to shake it since.
Okay, and do you go by all the syllables, Tinkerbell?
No, mostly I just go by Tink.
Tink. Okay, yeah. That's good. We will go by Tink for the rest of this episode.
Love it.
Okay. Hey, Tink, have you had a chance to listen to the podcast?
I've listened to a couple of episodes, mostly people that I know. He did an interview with Jeff Garmeyer, and I listened to his episode, and also Pretzel, Matt Mason. It's a good friend of mine. I listened to his as well.
Nice. So you are familiar with the format. You know that we've got a segment towards the end of the episode called the Hiking Hack, where you will have a chance to share some of your trail wisdom with our listeners to make their next outdoor experience even better.
Okay.
Trailblazers Toolkit.
That's right, Tink. It's time for the Trailblazers Toolkit, sponsored by the ultralight backpacking gear company 6 Moon Designs. I love to talk about gear on the podcast, and I love to hear about the most important item in my guest adventure gear. So, Tink, if you were preparing for your next adventure and I was the one providing you with all your gear, what is the one specific piece of gear you would insist on being packed? Now, make sure to give me all the specifics on that piece of gear. Tell me why you've got to have it out there. And this could be any kind of item. It could be gear, it could be apparel, it could be a luxury item. So, Tink, what is that item in your toolkit?
Man, I feel like that's such a hard question because there's so many things that I consider essential, but I'm going to relate this back to my recent experience. You and I have talked, I haven't mentioned this on the show yet, but I just came off of Mount Kilimanjaro and I spent 6 days sleeping in a tent on the ground on a really high quality, very expensive sleeping pad, and I still got the worst sleep of my life. And I have been a die-hard, adamant, no holds barred hammock camper since the day I decided to start backpacking. That was in 2013. So I've been a hammock camper for 10 years. I was never a tent camper. I spent one night on the ground in a tent when I was a little kid and I hated it. So whenever I decided I was going to take up backpacking and I found out that there was an option that didn't involve sleeping on the ground, I was just sold from the get-go. So I've been a hammock camper for 10 years, and every single time I have to go to the ground, I'm reminded why I chose that path. 10 years ago, I was 10 years younger. I don't think I had reached the point yet where my body felt like I'd been in a wrestling match with a bulldozer if I didn't get a good night's sleep. I definitely wasn't to the point yet where I was having chronic hip pain and chronic knee pain and stuff like that. And I still back then insisted on a hammock. These days, my body doesn't take to sleeping on the ground very well. And I wake up after that fight with the bulldozer all night feeling like I've been hit by a truck. And I don't think that's the best way to start a day when you're in the backcountry. I think the best way to start a day is feeling refreshed and having had a wonderful night's sleep. I don't want to do adventures much anymore if I can't sleep in my hammock. So I'm going to insist that you pack that. The hammock that I have used for 10 years and recently purchased for a second time after spending probably close to 1,500 nights in it is a Warbonnet Blackbird. And I wouldn't have any other hammock. You couldn't probably give me one for free. So that's what I'm going to make you pack for me.
That is a fantastic in-depth answer. I've got a couple of follow-up questions. One is, what if there are no trees around? Do you then have to, by necessity, go to the ground?
So that has been my experience in the past, is that yes, by necessity, I have to go to the ground. There are actually some pretty innovative products out there these days for people who hammock camp. I have not personally tested any of them out, so I can't say whether or not they're viable options. For me, it's been I'm just going to sacrifice and go to the ground, but I would love at some point in the future to try and hopefully find like a portable ultralight hammock stand option that actually works, that actually can support weight, that holds up to extensive use, and that doesn't weigh 5 pounds.
Yeah, you've got trekking pole tents. Why not a trekking pole hammock?
Yeah, I don't know if trekking poles specifically, at least the ones that I use, would have the ability to support that kind of weight, but there are, the name escapes me. There's a company that I recently looked into that is marketing an ultralight hammock stand for exactly the purpose that you're mentioning. It was outrageously expensive, so I have not purchased it to buy it, but.
Yeah, the hiking pole hammock was in jest, but I'm surprised to hear that somebody's working on a solution like that. That sounds pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Now, since you prefer being in a hammock and do not like going to the ground, do you now plan your trips as much around trees as possible?
I have to admit that I probably do. And there are definitely parts of certain long trails and even just certain backpacking routes, not necessarily on a long trail, that I would maybe be like, I don't really know if I want to do that because I'd have to sleep on the ground. But then again, I did just spend 7 days on Mount Kilimanjaro sleeping in a tent. So I think if it's an epic enough adventure or something that I want to do bad enough, then sure, let's go to the ground for a few days. But any sort of long-term commitment, I'm not really interested in.
Got it. Hey, let's keep talking about gear with...
It's the hiking pole.
A hiking pole, and that's pole spelled with two L's, like a survey, not like the thing you hold in your hand out there on the trail. This is a 7-question survey that's going to help me give you a score on the sanity scale from 1 to 100, with 1 being completely insane and 100 being completely sane. Now, I have to tell you that if you are a hammock camper and you've just done Mount Kilimanjaro, those 2 items right there automatically take a 20 points off of your possible total. So your highest possible total today is 80.
Oh boy. Okay.
All right.
Already creeping toward the insane.
That's right. That's right. So these are 7 questions, all related to hiking, and it's not rapid fire. So I want to hear your response, but I also want to hear some justification as to why that might be. That'll help me dial in my score for you.
Okay.
All right. Question number 1. When you're out on the trail and you're with others, what are the top 3 topics of conversation?
Poop. How much your pack weighs. And did anybody remember to bring alcohol?
Those are great. Poop is always on the list somehow. The other 2 kind of come and go. Actually, I haven't heard too much of someone mentioning, did you bring the alcohol or not? That's a good one, though. I like it. I like it. That's an important question.
Yeah, it's super important.
Now, do you carry the little bottles, or do you have one person carry one big bottle?
Did you know that you can rig up those bags of wine to work with certain like tubing would go into a camelback, and then you can just put in your pack and just drink while you're hiking?
That could be dangerous.
Could be dangerous. I tend to personally carry the little like mini airplane bottles, and I mix them with various electrolyte packets. So for example, like a lemon lime electrolyte packet with a little bottle of whiskey or bourbon is like a whiskey sour.
I like it. I like it. I'm learning all kinds of new tips and tricks.
Yeah.
All right. Question number 2. What is the best trail name you've encountered out there?
Oh gosh. Can I cuss on this show?
If the moment requires cussing, you can cuss.
Okay. I'm going to say this, and then if you need to edit it out and I need to come up with a different one, then we can.
Okay.
But the best trail name that I think I ever heard of in my entire hiking career was in 2015, and I encountered this person's trail name on my very first night on the Appalachian Trail in a trail log, and it was Thunderfuck. And nobody knew who this person was. I think everybody assumed that it was probably a young, hot person getting their rocks off while going down the trail or whatever. And it turned out to be like a really awesome, like crazy hiker old lady.
Nice. I mean, that is quite a name to live up to.
Yeah, I never caught her. I never caught up to her to actually meet her in person. I just eventually found out who she was.
Some parents name their kids with aspirational names like Prince, or you can imagine the names out there. But to be given that name or to have that trail name, that really is a name to live up to. That must be tough.
Yeah, can't imagine what it was like to be her.
All right. Question number 3 on the poll. Toilet paper, bidet, leaves, snow, or something else?
Something else. I don't think I've ever carried toilet paper on a single hike I've ever been on. I am a huge proponent of the pea cloth and have been since way before different brands started coming out with technical pea cloths that are intended for that purpose. I used to just carry a good old bandana or a washcloth and use that. For more serious business, I've always used wet wipes and packed them out.
More serious business. It's so funny that you spare no one with the trail name, but hey, we're going to be a little bit delicate here, and we're going to talk about when it's more serious.
Hey, you said only when it's necessary.
That's true. That's true. Okay. Question number 4. Is it breakfast in camp, on trail, or no breakfast?
breakfast in camp, 100%.
Take your time. What is your go-to breakfast?
Okay, so I'll tell you, like I tell every single person that ever asks me for food advice about what to bring on trail, is that I am not the person to ask, because I pack like gourmet food. I can't do a Pop-Tart, not doing a honey bun, pack an instant oatmeal, absolutely not. Like a protein shake with coffee powder, nope, it's not me. So my go-to breakfast on a backpacking trip is usually going to be an everything bagel thin with onion and chive cream cheese, 2 strips of pre-cooked bacon, a hard-boiled egg, and a half of an avocado.
That is fancy.
Oh, yeah. Now, on shorter trips, if I don't have to, say, carry fuel to get me by for weeks and weeks, or it's not super hot outside, then I will pack essentially like an uncooked omelet in a Ziploc bag, crack a few eggs, some onions and bell peppers and shredded cheese and bacon in there. In a Ziploc bag, you can drop that right down in a jet boil and boil it for about 15 minutes, and it cooks the eggs and turns it into an omelet.
Nice. I want to go hiking with you.
Yeah, my food bag is always definitely the heaviest thing I have.
Okay. Question number 5, solo hiking or tramley?
Do I have to choose? Can it be both?
What is your preference?
Depends on the day.
Okay.
I guess I prefer hiking throughout the day by myself. I don't really want somebody on my heels. I don't want to be trying to keep up with anybody. I like to just go my own pace and stop and pick blueberries and take pictures and whatever I'm doing. But I do enjoy having the company of trail family at the end of the day if I'm in camp or at a hostel or something like that.
Tink, that is an outstanding answer. I really identify with that, because if you are trying to keep up with somebody who's faster, it's frustrating. And if
Yes.
you've got somebody who is maybe faster and right behind you, that is also frustrating. And if you are if you're having to hike with a group and you got someone who's a real slowpoke who wants to be in the group and complains that you're leaving him behind, that is also frustrating. So this whole concept of hiking by yourself during the day, doing what you want to do, your own pace, whatever it might be, but then you reap the benefits of being in camp with multiple people.
Yeah, that's always been my preference. And I tend to be the slower hiker. I'm not fast, and I like to stop and smell the roses. So feeling like I'm holding up a group is probably my biggest source of frustration. And I much prefer to just say, hey, about how far are we going today, guys? Where are we stopping at? And then, all right, I'll see you guys when I get there, is really my preferred way to do it.
Okay. Question number 6, rank the following in order of your preference, how you'd like to do these from your most favorite to your least favorite. 1 mile severe uphill, 1 mile severe downhill, 20-mile road walk.
I'm ranking these least to most.
Most to
least. Okay. I would most of those things most like to do 1 mile severe uphill, followed by 1 mile severe downhill. And I will be hitching past the 20-mile road walk. Not even going to do it.
Very creative. You're going off of the answer sheet and you're making up a new answer. Fantastic. All right.
Ask me why I've never through hiked the Bartram Trail, which literally goes through the middle of the town that I live in.
I've never heard of the Bartram Trail.
Now you have, and the reason is because there's a 16-mile road walk
that you would hitch to get past.
Yeah, I live there. I know all the people there. All I would have to do is call somebody to come pick me up.
All right. Question number 7, last question in the poll. When you're out there on the trail, what's on your head? Ball cap, floppy hat, straw hat, sun hoodie, or no hat? Or something else?
It depends on the trail. Most likely a buff, just like headband type buff to keep my hair out of my face. But if it's super, super sunny, like it was on Kilimanjaro, or like it would be, say, in the desert section of the PCT or something, it would be a sun hat, like a wide brim sun hat.
Okay. All right. Hey, Tink, stand by. I've got to do some math here. I take off the shoes so I can use all 20 digits.
Okay.
So I got to carry the 3.
So that means I at least got to 20.
That's what that means. Yes. I'll look at on the bright side there. Say I carry the 3, going to multiply by pi. We're going to divide by root 5, and I'm going to adjust for the number of eggs in your uncooked omelet in your bag. And I come up with a score of 57.
Okay. Solidly well-rounded on the insanity scale.
Yes, you are just north of the midpoint. Would your friends and family agree with that score?
Probably. Family for sure. Some of my friends are crazier than me.
Okay. By comparison, it's nice to have that kind of context. All right. Hey, before we get too far down the trail, Tink, let's back up a little bit. We'd love to hear about your background, where you grew up, what kinds of things did you do in high school, and how did you get involved in the thru hiking cult?
First of all, I just love that you call it a cult, because that is what it felt like to me when I first got involved.
Hey, any organization that convinces you to carry everything on your back and sleep in the dirt for months on end, it's got to be a cult.
It's got to be a cult. So I guess if we're backing all the way up to high school, I was not a part of a family that I would say anybody would call outdoorsy, at least not by mine and your standards and the standards of probably anybody listening to this podcast. I spent a lot of time outside, but that's because I lived on a farm. So I spent time vaccinating cattle and riding my horses around the perimeter of the farm to check the fences. And I showed cattle and horses in high school. So I spent a lot of time training the animals and washing the animals and exercising the animals. And all of that's outside stuff, but it's not, I didn't think of myself as outdoorsy growing up. And I don't think anybody else really did either. Younger than high school, my dad and my grandpa were really into hunting and fishing, and they did expose me to those passions. I didn't ever really develop any sort of passion or interest in those activities outside of it was just something to do to spend time with my dad and my grandpa. I do think those types of experiences that I had getting up before dawn to go out on the river and check trot lines with my grandpa, or traipsing through the woods in the literal middle of the night on a school night, walking toward baying coonhounds with my dad. Those types of experiences set me up for being more confident in the outdoors as an adult and the kinds of pursuits that I do now. But I didn't feel like I was developing outdoor skills. I didn't feel like I was outdoorsy, that sort of thing, even though I was spending lots of time outside. In college, I got into training dogs. And again, I spent tons of time outside working with those dogs, but I still wasn't what I would have thought was outdoorsy. I didn't start hiking until I adopted a particularly energetic and difficult dog from a rescue. And in trying to figure out a way to manage this dog's energy as a very young adult who lived in an apartment, I picked up hiking. I was like, I'm just going to take this dog out to the woods and try to burn off some of this energy. And I discovered that both the dog and I really liked hiking and really liked being in the woods. And then I went to grad school and I watched the movie The Way, which is about some guy that walks the Camino in Spain, and got this idea in my head that going for a long walk sounded like it'd be a little bit of fun. Then I found out that a sorority sister of mine in college, she had hiked the Appalachian Trail in 2013. And I casually mentioned it to her. She said, "Hey, you need to come to Appalachian Trail Days with me in Virginia." And I was like, "What's that?" She's, it's like a trail party." And me, being naive and having no idea what I was getting myself into, decided to go. And I went with her, and I found my people there in that cult, and decided that the AT was something that I had to do because I had to experience it firsthand. I was, surrounded for 3 days on a weekend in Damascus, Virginia, by all of these people that had this experience, this thing that they shared that connected them to each other, and I needed it. That's how I got talked into getting on the Appalachian Trail a couple years later.
Isn't that awesome when you find your people and something just clicks? You're like, I'm home. I'm here. This is where I belong.
Yeah, that's exactly how I felt. There were definitely moments, don't get me wrong, at that event where I felt out of place, more than anything because I didn't have a trail story to share. I was new and so inexperienced, and I felt like a fish out of water. But at the same time, I just related so hard to these people and this lifestyle that they were living. And I knew that even though I didn't have it yet, it was something that I absolutely had to do.
Now, taking a look at your trail resume and what you've been up to, looks like you spend a lot of time outdoors. What do you do to finance your adventures? Do you have a 9 to 5 job? Doesn't seem like that would be a likely thing in your case.
No, I no longer have a 9 to 5. I do think that it's worth mentioning before I get into what I do now that I have had multiple careers, and I struggled for a long time to find something that I felt like funded the lifestyle that I wanted to have, and then also allowed me time to live that lifestyle, because I feel like those two things are often mutually exclusive. And I spent a lot of time, especially in between my 2 Appalachian Trail attempts, I spent a lot of time bouncing between seasonal work and temporary jobs, substitute teaching. I worked administration at dog shows for a while. I worked bartending and restaurant jobs. I tutored kids. I wrote resumes for people. Anything that I could think of to make money, I did, because I didn't feel like I could hold a steady job and still do the types of adventures that I wanted to do. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people run up against that. It's, can I be a hiker? Can I live this hiker trash lifestyle? Or do I have a stable job and a career and the ability to pay my bills? And a lot of people, I think, struggle with that. I struggled with that for a lot of years. And ultimately, despite I already having 2 college degrees in totally unrelated fields, I ended up deciding to go to nursing school. And in nursing school, people always ask, oh, what made you decide to be a nurse? And they want some dramatic or big story about compassion and loving to take care of people and being called to this profession. And I think that all of that is noble, but I don't think that those are necessarily reasons to do a job. I chose nursing because it was practical, and because I felt like I would be good at it, and because in the research that I had done, I was pretty sure this career would allow me to live the lifestyle that I wanted to live. Do I find fulfillment in it? Yes, every day. I literally save lives. And that is something that not a lot of people can say. But I didn't go into nursing to save lives. I went into nursing because it was a practical choice for my lifestyle. Now I work as a traveling nurse. So I set my own schedule. I only work when I want to work. I take time off when I want to take time off, and I make enough money to be able to do that. That's why I'm living in this camper. I have a little cabin in Franklin, North Carolina, which is where I call home, but I work all over the place, and I'm currently working in Virginia. So I'll be here until the end of the year. I just took 2 months off to spend adventuring, and there's no other job that I can think of where you can do that and still have a job when you get back. So
that's a very pragmatic career. I love the way you framed that for us, and that you took the job, you went after the job because this is something that's going to allow you to do what you want to do and still earn enough to be comfortable. And then you found that when you're in it, it's very rewarding in itself, and you're very fulfilled by it. That's awesome.
Yeah. And I only have to work 3 days a week instead of 5. So
nice perk. All right. Now, in terms of what you just finished, you're just fresh back from Kilimanjaro?
Yes. I got off of Mount Kilimanjaro a week ago today.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I made it to the top. I don't know if I told you that or not. So congratulations are in order, but
You said you did make it, or you did not?
I did.
You did. Okay, good.
Yes.
Good. I feel better. I feel good about my congratulations then.
Yeah, I was like, he's congratulating me, but I don't know if he actually knows that I made it. So
I just assumed, because you're such a badass.
Yeah, so I just got off of Kilimanjaro. That was a really wild thing to experience.
And how many days did that take? What was the duration of the trip?
I did it in 7 days. What a lot of people don't know about Kilimanjaro is that there are multiple routes to the summit. So not everybody takes the same route up or the same route down. I took a route up called the Machame route. and I took a route down called the Moeka route. So I went up one trail and down another. There are different routes of varying days. Some are 4, some are 9. The one I did was 7.
Yeah, as I understand it, it's a long approach to the summit,
Yes.
right? You're hiking days doing a gradual incline to the top. Is that accurate?
Yes, that is correct up until the final day. So the really unique thing about Kilimanjaro when it comes to mountains is that it's a freestanding mountain. So it's not a part of a range. It's the only mountain. It has 3 peaks, but there's no other mountains. You're essentially just coming up out of the desert and straight up from, I think the base of the mountain is at around 5,000 feet and the summit is at 19,300 and some change. A lot of people, even people that are well acclimated already, can't go from 5,000 feet to 19,000 feet in 2 or 3 days, even though the distance isn't that. I think the route that I took down was 2 days down. It was about 14 miles. A lot of people that you and I know, 14 miles in a day is a walk in the park. But in that 14 miles was over 14,000 foot of elevation change. And a lot of people can't acclimate that fast to just go straight up 14,000 feet in one go. So you do a longer approach and then often come down via a more direct route.
Now, does someone just show up to Kilimanjaro and just start walking, or do you sign up with an expedition company, a group that leads? How does that work?
There are a couple of different ways to do it. By far, the most common / popular way to do it is to sign up with an operator, which is going to be a company that provides you with guides, porters, cooks, etc., all gear, whatever you might need, and they guide you up to the summit. That's the option that I did. This was, again, pretty far outside of my comfort zone as far as things that I normally take on. And I didn't feel that I was either prepared equipment wise or knowledge wise to be able to do it any differently. There are, however, ways to do it more self-supported. Kilimanjaro National Park, which is the mountain and the surrounding area, they require that everybody that goes up the mountain have a guide, like a certified guide. So you can't just fly to Africa and hop off the plane at Kilimanjaro International Airport and hop on the trail. You would get stopped at the gate and they would turn you back because you don't have a guide. But you can do this trek with just a guide and do it otherwise self-supported, carrying all your own gear, setting up your own camp, cooking your own meals, that sort of thing. That is not the common way to do it. Very few people, I think, do it that way, but it can be done. Most people do as I did. They go with an operator. This whole experience was just absolutely mind-boggling to me. We had I went with a group of 13 other women, so 14 including me, and we had 53, that's 53 support crew. So that was 6 guides, 42 porters, 3 cooks, and 4 toilet porters that carried toilets up the mountain for us.
Wow, that's the way to do it.
Yeah, it was wild. I might be spoiled for backpacking now because I don't have somebody bringing me coffee to my tent in the morning and carrying a toilet so I don't have to dig a cat hole.
Yeah, you need to find a hiking buddy now that's going to be willing to carry the toilet for you.
Exactly.
That's going to be tough to find. And Stacia, I have to imagine that when the cooks or the chef went over the menu, you probably corrected them. Said, no, that's not quite fancy enough. Let me show you how I do things on the trail. See if you can keep up, please.
Listen, you would be surprised. They cooked us full-on 4-course meals on this mountain.
Wow. Yeah, there are many versions of outdoor adventuring, right? There is doing it the hard way. You get your cold soakers out there what a miserable existence that is.
What a miserable existence.
And then you've got folks doing the traditional type of stuff on a through hike, the dehydrated meals and all that. And you have the fancy people like yourself kicking it up a notch. And then you've got next level 53 support crew, multiple chefs, 4-course dinners. There's just a whole spectrum out there of activities.
There is. It's a big, wide world of outdoor adventures out there. And I think that's something that I really do try to drive home to people when I talk to them that there's not just one way to do this. I urge people go like with what you have, where you're at, and do it the way you want to do it. Because if you try to do it somebody else's way, I think you're less likely to be successful.
Well said. Hey, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to hear from the advertisers, pay some bills, and we're going to come back and we're going to talk about some of your past adventures and what is coming up next for you. So stay tuned for that. We'll be right back. And welcome back. We are talking to Stacia Bennett, aka Tinkerbell, or Tink for short. And I'm intrigued by how we ended that last segment. We spent some time talking about Kilimanjaro, and then also you mentioned that there is not one way to do this in terms of outdoor adventuring. And on this podcast, I talk to a variety of people. A lot of people tend to be thru hikers. Talk to calendar year triple crowners. Talk to people who are doing some very incredible, tough stuff out there in the thru hiking arena. But thru hiking is not the only way to adventure out there. And just looking at the kinds of activities that you've been involved in, it is a very eclectic mix of adventuring. We've got your long ass section hikes of the Appalachian Trail. We've got other challenges, the Waterfall Challenge, the Fire Tower Challenge, hiking or peak bagging Colorado 14ers. So there's a whole variety of activities out there.
Yeah, there's so much to do. And I think very early on, we've already talked about this, 10 years ago when I was first getting into hiking, I got sucked into the Appalachian Trail thru hiking community. And that community is beautiful and wonderful. And I definitely attribute my love of the outdoors and of backpacking and hiking to getting involved in that and to the time that I spent on the AT. For all that it's worth, I tried and failed to thru hike the AT twice. And I don't expect that I will ever be a thru hiker. Will I finish the AT? Yes, I actually plan to finish the AT in 2025. But I think that it's important for people to see and also for people to be recognized who do things differently. And I think that there's just so many ways out there to be a hiker and to be an outdoor adventurer. When I came off of the AT in 2016, to segue into some of the other stuff that you mentioned, I felt the typical, people call it post-hike depression. And for me, I felt that a lot of that I was feeling, the remorse about quitting my thru hike and the disappointment in myself for not continuing on despite the fact that I was injured. That's why I had to get off trail. I was feeling all these feelings, and what now? I wanted to do this big, grand, important thing, and I didn't. So what now? And I was just really struggling with not having that katahdin at the end of the hike to look forward to not have that one singular goal that I was striving toward. And so I decided maybe I just needed to set a different, maybe more attainable goal for myself, something that I could succeed at, and something that got me outside hiking as often as possible, because ultimately thru hiking isn't what I loved. Hiking is what I loved. And I found a way to incorporate that by, in 2016, beginning to participate in something called the 52 Hike Challenge, which is just it's an organization. They promote people getting outside to hike at least one day a week, every week of the year. And I began that challenge in 2016 after my AT hiking attempt, and it just gave me that push that I needed to get back out there. I think I didn't hike for 3 months after I got off the AT. I was just bummed and I didn't find joy in hiking anymore. And then the 52 Hike Challenge turned that around for me. When I started doing that, I've actually now completed the 52 Hike Challenge every single year, with the exception of, I think it was 2018. I'd have to go back and double check that because my years run together. But my mom had an accident and was in the hospital for almost 2 months. And I missed a lot of hiking time while I was taking care of her. That's the only year since then that I haven't done the 52 Hike Challenge, where I hiked at least once a week, every week of the year. Once I got that down, I was like, there's other goals out there that I can set for myself. And I started looking for those. And I became really interested in fire towers and the history of fire watching in the United States. Before I ever even hiked the AT, one of my first hikes ever on the AT was to Albert Mountain Fire Tower. And I was just obsessed. I was like, what is this structure? Why is it here? And I deep dived into all this research about it. I read books about it, all of this stuff. And I discovered that there are fire tower challenges in different states. North Carolina has one, and I believe there's one up in maybe in the Adirondacks or in the Northeast as well. And there may be others that I don't know about. I'm an East Coast gal, so that's where most of my hiking efforts are focused. So I took on that, started working on that.
Well, hang on. Let's stay on that for a second. What did you find out about the history of fire towers and fire watching in America? I'm intrigued because in my local community, there is one fire tower that I'm aware of. It's the Slide Mountain Fire Tower. And I hiked up there with my son one time, and it was really cool. And it was continuously manned. Even in this day and age, there was a ranger up there in the fire tower watching things.
Yeah, I am no expert by any means, but a lot of what I found out was that fire towers used to be the be all end all for fire detection. That is how fires were detected, wildfires. They often were continuously manned. And that is incredible to me because some of these towers are 12 by 12 or 14 by 14 cabs, and that people just stayed there for months on end. I learned that the CCC built a lot of them, and just learning about how the materials got hauled in there to build these structures on these super remote areas. It's just hauling them in with mules and carts and on people's backs. And it was just absolutely mind-boggling the amount of work that went into putting these structures up and then to manning them all the time. And by and large, fire towers are not a major source of fire detection anymore, but in certain areas, they are still absolutely critical. I ended up actually just this past year following 2 different people on Instagram who were working as fire lookouts over the summer, and just being involved in their day-to-day activities in the tower was something that I found fascinating. But they live up there. They live up on the tower for 5, 6, 7 weeks at a time, and they get food and supplies brought into them by llamas or mules, and they don't come down. They just stay up there. I don't know. It's an interesting culture, and it's a really interesting part of our history that I think a lot of people have just forgotten about. I think actually Jack Kerouac spent some time in a fire tower. He writes about it in one of his books.
Interesting. I did not realize that. Okay. And how many fire towers are there in North Carolina?
That number is actually disputed. There are, if you can believe it, there are fire towers or remnants of fire towers that are still standing in places that have been lost to the public record. Like even the Forest Service they don't actually have coordinates for or directions to how to get to them. A friend of mine, actually, part of her kind of personal project is finding and documenting these fire towers that have been forgotten. So I don't have an exact number, but there are 22, I believe, on the Fire Tower Challenge in North Carolina.
I don't know if that's spooky or mysterious or romantic or what, but it strikes a chord in me knowing that there are structures out there that have just been lost to time, lost to humanity, and it's just out there on their own, and that somebody's out there looking for them. It's almost a setting for a novel.
Yeah, she spends a lot of time looking at really old archival maps to try to locate possible tower sites. And she has found and documented a few that are not on any current maps.
Okay. Hey, let's get back to the adventures. Thank you for that little sidetrack. That was, that was very interesting. So let's talk about your AT attempts. What happened in 2015? When did you start? How far did you get? And why did you get off the trail?
I mentioned way earlier in the podcast that I wasn't able to start until a little bit later than usual because I was in graduate school at the time. But on those weekends where I was going out and doing trail magic and section hikes, I hiked the first 150 miles, about up to Nantahala Outdoor Center. I started my northbound attempt at Nantahala Outdoor Center, and hiked to Harrisburg, Virginia, where I got off trail because I broke my ankle. I actually had broken it. It had been broken for a long time. I broke it actually probably in Tennessee, most likely, and hiked another 150 to 200 miles on it before I realized that there was a real problem, and then hiked a good bit more before I finally decided that my attempt was done and I had to get off trail. It was a non-displaced fracture, and didn't, even after all of that torture, didn't require surgery or anything to fix, but it did require rest and to not be hiking every day.
Holy smokes. How many days or weeks were you hiking on a broken ankle?
It's hard to say exactly when I broke it. I personally believe that the initial fracture happened when I took a really hard fall coming down from Roan Mountain in Tennessee. And my memory does not serve me. I would have to look back and see what mile marker that was. But I took another pretty significant fall coming into Bland, Virginia, which is somewhere in the vicinity of 500 miles. And that is the fall that I think was the icing on the cake. I fell, and 3 or 4 miles later, I came to a road crossing and took my shoe off, and my foot ballooned up to the size of a cantaloupe, and it was black and blue and purple. And I had to put my camp shoes on to keep hiking because my foot wouldn't fit back in my hiking shoe. And I should have gone home that day, and I didn't. And so I actually got off trail. My last hiking day was to the top of McAfee Knob, which is at around mile 7. So that's approximately 200 miles.
Wow. Next time I feel like a little twinge in my hamstring and I forego the daily run, I'm going to think of you and realize what a wuss I am.
Maybe that just means that you're smart.
Okay. And when did you, I've been neglected to ask you this earlier, but I'm always fascinated by this moment when you learn about a trail that goes from Springer, Georgia to Maine, Mount Katahdin in Maine. You realize that's a thing. You can put your foot on every inch of trail from Georgia to Maine. Did that kind of blow your mind? Do you remember that moment?
I do actually remember that moment, and it's not going to be when you thought that it was going to be. I was really involved in 4-H when I was little, like in elementary and middle school, and even some into high school. And one of my favorite things to do in middle school was go to summer camp with the 4-H club. And the 4-H club operates summer camps in Georgia anyway. They have several different ones, and it's which one your county ends up going to is a toss-up. And so I was 12 years old. I was in the 6th grade. And my county won the lottery to go to Camp Wausiga, which is somewhere near Dahlonega, Georgia. And we've already mentioned this. I was not really an outdoorsy kid. I was not really an athletic kid. And I didn't know what I was getting into going to summer camp at this camp in the mountains. I had previously been to a 4-H summer camp at the beach. And that was the experience I was comparing it to. And it turns out it was nothing like that whatsoever. We were placed into different groups in this camp, and each group had different activities they were assigned to. And one of the activities that my group got assigned out on one of the days of the week, we could have gone canoeing, we could have gone hiking, or we could have gone to an archery course. And my group drew the hiking straw. And so I'm like, okay, I've never been hiking before. I don't know what this is about to involve. And we get on a bus and we drive down a long dirt road. And I'm getting super car sick because I don't do the back seats of cars, much less the back of a bus on a dirt road. And anybody who's ever driven up the dirt road to the parking lot of Springer Mountain knows exactly what road I'm talking about and how bad it is. So I didn't know where we were going, but we drive on this dirt road and I'm green, and we finally get off the bus and I'm pretty sure that I vomited. And then I had to hike, and I just remember hiking and sweating and thinking that the uphill was really hard. And the person who was guiding us on this hike was babbling on about the Appalachian Trail, and it goes from Georgia to Maine. And I wasn't listening because I was sick. And then We got to the summit of Springer Mountain, which anybody who's ever stood on the summit of Springer Mountain knows there's not really a view there. It's a little anticlimactic. But something that hiking guides said about from Georgia to Maine finally hit me. And I think I can picture my little 12-year-old self standing there and my jaw dropping and being like, all the way to Maine? And I was just mind blown. I was mind blown that from where I was standing on this mountain in Georgia, that I could have just kept walking and walked to Maine. And sixth grader me didn't even know how far away Maine was, but it sounded like a really long way. I filed that somewhere way down deep in the back of my brain for a lot of years until in college, the idea of the AT resurfaced again. And the awe and wonder I think that sixth grader me experienced on top of that mountain came flooding back.
Yeah, you are not alone in that. Hearing about, learning about these long trails, and then that idea just percolating and festering for a while, years, decades, before someone feels compelled to follow up on it.
Yeah. Yeah, I hadn't thought about it in years, and then all of a sudden I'm like, the Appalachian Trail, it goes all the way to Maine. And the rest is history.
Okay. And you've described yourself a couple of times now as not outdoorsy when you were young, not athletic. And yet here you are living a life of outdoor adventure. And talk about how there is no one specific type of person made for the outdoors. I talk about all the time on this podcast that the outdoors are for everybody, regardless of the color of your skin, your religion, what you look like, how tall you are, how much you weigh. This is something that belongs to everybody.
Yeah, so this is one of my favorite things to talk about. We've already touched on there's no one way to have an outdoor adventure. There's no one way to be a hiker. There's also no one way to look like a person that does those things. And I think that is something that resonates so deeply with me, because when I was first getting involved in the hiking community over a decade ago now, one of the hardest things that I encountered, one of the biggest barriers, was that I couldn't walk into a store, not even a big box store like REI, and find a technical hiking outfit that fit the body that I live in. And I relied and often ended up in what could have been dangerous situations because of having improper clothing, because synthetic hiking clothing that is safe to wear in cold or wet environments, it just didn't exist in a size that I could wear. And that hindered me, I think, getting involved in some of these more adventurous pursuits. For Kilimanjaro is so recent, but I went to Kilimanjaro without a ski jacket because I couldn't find one in my size even today. And I've lived my entire life as first a chubby kid and then a fat woman. And that is just the reality that I face. This is the body that I exist in on a day-to-day basis. And having to still 10, 12 years after I started this thing, having to still say, I'm not sure if I can safely do this adventure because I can't find gear to fit. And I'm not even close to being at the high end of the size range for people that attempt these kinds of things. And the reality is that there are people out here like me doing it. So I need clothing companies, I need gear companies to step up and say, these people are doing it, here's the stuff they need. And so then we improvise. I've been out here doing this for 12 years. I've done over 1,200 miles of the Appalachian Trail. I have spent consecutively 6 to 7 months a year, every year since 2015, outside, either living in a camper or living out of my truck and sleeping in a hammock. I've hiked hundreds of miles a year, every year since then. And I am a hiker. I am an outdoor adventurer. What I look like doesn't dictate whether or not I can do those things. But what sometimes can dictate it is what is available to me. And that, I think, is one of the biggest struggles that I face. And I think it's a struggle that a lot of people face in different capacities, because as you mentioned, the outdoors is for everyone. The outdoors itself, these mountains, they don't discriminate. They might be just as hard for you as they are for me, as they are for anybody else that you've interviewed on this podcast. But the things that do discriminate are people, and people exist in the outdoors. And sometimes those discriminations exist in those spaces because of the people that occupy them. So I think that kind of just to circle like back around is there's no one way to do it. And there's also no one way to look like someone who does it.
And so what advice do you have for someone who's listening in right now who maybe identifies with what you're talking about and is considering getting outside and doing it, but doesn't think that they have the body type to do it, or doesn't have the equipment or the clothing, the appropriate clothing? What have you learned during these years where you've had to deal with that?
I think I'm going to answer that in two parts. One is if someone is out there and they think I would like to do a section hike on the AT, or I would like to hike Mount Kilimanjaro, whatever this thing is that somebody's thinking that they could do. And then the next thought that comes into their head is, but people who look like me don't do that, is to get on Instagram or get on TikTok or get on their blogging website of choice and do a search for those types of things and people that look like you, because you will find it. When I first got involved in the hiking community back in, I think it was 2013, 2014, when I was first planning my AT hikes, I didn't think there was anybody out there that looked like me doing that. And then once I got a little bit more entrenched in the community, I discovered those people are out there. They may not be on the cover of Outside Magazine. They may not be always the person getting interviewed on the podcast, but they're out there. And find them and follow them and ask them questions, because those are the people that know the answers to the things that you're facing. The other part of that I want to say is that the only way to get good at a lot of these outdoor activities is to just start. You're not going to get good at hiking by sitting at home and researching hiking gear. You're not going to get good at climbing unless you go and take a climbing class with an instructor and let them show you how to rappel and how to tie knots and how to keep yourself safe. You're not going to get good at whitewater rafting if you don't ever go whitewater rafting. And I think that a lot of people get really caught up in the, let me research this as much as possible. And I'm not saying that research isn't important, only that the only way to truly get good at it is to just do it and to start with whatever skill level you have. If your skill level is not climbing Mount Kilimanjaro next week, if your skill level is taking a walk on the nature trail at the local park in your city, then that's where you start. You start and you build it up. When I first started hiking and training for the AT, I spent a lot of time in a wooded park behind the intramural soccer fields at the University of Georgia. There were a couple of hills, there were a bunch of pine trees, and I just walked in circles back there until I felt confident going somewhere a little bit more remote. And that wasn't a matter of days for me. That was months. I walked those trails behind the soccer fields for months before I finally got up the nerve to take my dog to a trail that wasn't inside of a fence at a university and go and hike somewhere else. And that's what it takes, just starting where you're at and saying there is a path from this 1 mile nature trail at the park to the summit of Mount Kilimanjaro, or there is a path from there to Mount Katahdin. You just have to start where you're at and say, I'm going to take it in these little bite-sized pieces until I get good enough to do what I really want to do.
Stacia, you should be a college football coach. I'm ready to run through a wall right now. I am so fired up. That was so motivational. Thank you so much. There are so many barriers or perceived barriers to people doing what they want to do. They don't have the right gear. They don't have enough time. I'm not in shape enough. And if you're waiting for the perfect moment where everything aligns, you're never going to do it. And so I love this idea of, you know what, if this is all I can do right now, this is what I'm going to do. And it's going to lead to something bigger and better. I just have to keep after it.
Yeah, you have to start where you're at. And that is really probably the number one advice that I give to people when they ask me, how do I get to where you're at? You start where you're at. You don't get to where I'm at overnight. It took me 10 years to get here. A really good kind of example of that is with, you briefly mentioned the waterfalls that I'm doing, which is probably like the most extensive thing that I'm doing. I've been for 6 years now working on a list of 500 different waterfalls in North Carolina. A lot of them require really expensive, difficult, dangerous bushwhacking and route finding. And when I first decided to embark on this challenge, I think it was maybe in probably 2017, maybe 2018, I looked at the list and I started reading some of the descriptions that I found online of the routes that you have to take to get to some of these waterfalls. And I was so discouraged. I said to myself, there's no way that I'm ever going to have the skills necessary to do these types of hikes. I'm used to walking the Appalachian Trail. The AT is a super highway compared to a lot of the routes that I would have to take. You don't have to route find on the AT. You follow white blazes on these trails, or there are no trails. A lot of these routes to waterfalls are just that. They are routes that are described in a guidebook somewhere, and you have to go out and use a map and compass and find your way. And in 2017, there was absolutely no way on earth that I could have safely done most of these hikes. And like I said, I felt a little discouraged about it, but I started where I could, because about 100 of those 500 waterfalls are on really well-established trails. And so I started with those 100. And as I did them, I got a little bit more comfortable on trails that maybe didn't have blazes, or on trails that didn't receive maintenance. And I started doing slightly harder ones. And then I started meeting people who had better skills than I had and asking them to teach me or to take me and show me. And once I got comfortable with saying, I don't know how to do that, and I don't have the skills, but I have the ability to learn, will you teach me? Then I started learning and people taught me. And now just yesterday I went to waterfall 244 out of 500. And every year I tackle harder and harder routes, and I test my route finding skills on more and more remote treks. And I'm still not as good as a lot of people. And there are still a lot of these routes that I'm not capable of doing today, but 2 or 3 years from now, I will be. And that's keeping that end goal, even if it's going to take a really long time. Keeping that end goal in mind is really what got me here.
That's so impressive. As you said that, I thought to myself, she's playing the long game. I think in today's society, it's all about immediate gratification. I'm glued to my phone. I'm glued to the TV. I want to stream. I'm going to binge watch. I'm not going to wait week to week for episodes. And so it's all right now. But you have approached this like you're playing the long game. You're doing what you can do now, knowing that you're building those skills and that endurance to do something even more complicated and difficult later on. And that is just so impressive.
I hope if anybody takes anything away from this, it's just to start where you're at and go from there.
Okay. Hey, what is next for Tink? What's the next big adventure?
I have a couple things going on. I currently neck deep in planning another Appalachian Trail LASH. I intend to hike the northern 1,000 miles starting at Harpers Ferry, West Virginia, and hiking to Mount Katahdin in Maine. Now, there are about 300 miles that I have already hiked. And as of where I'm at in planning right now, I'm intending on giving myself the time and the grace to repeat those 300 miles and do a 1,000-mile section hike to finish finally the AT 10 years after I initially started that goal. So that's in the works. 2025, I'll be at Trail Days in May, and then getting on the trail the week after and heading north and hoping to be finished in about 3.5 months if everything goes my way. in addition to that, I've been trying to do a little bit more international hiking. So I spent some time in Costa Rica earlier this year. I just went to Tanzania and hiked Mount Kilimanjaro. And I've got a hiking and camping trip coming up in Iceland in July of next year. That's my next upcoming big thing. Doing some camping and hiking in national parks, and then trying to do a trek. I probably am not saying this word right, but it's called the Lagavagar Trail. And it's not a super long trail. I think that the entire hike is only going to take me about 4 days. I think it's 35 or 36 miles. It's a hut to hut trek. And so I'm hoping to do that while I'm out there. And then I've had this goal of hiking the Colorado Trail like every single year since I got off the AT, and something else always comes up. But I'm hoping for that maybe in 2026 after the AT.
Okay. You've got them lined up.
Yeah.
Ready to go. Fantastic.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, Tink, are you hiker trash?
I guess I probably have been for quite some time now. I don't think I related to that term very much in the beginning, but it's grown on me.
Do you have a defining hiker trash moment?
Oh man, a defining hiker trash moment. I guess probably in 2015 in Daleville, I drank some beer that somebody pulled out of the dumpster at the grocery store across from the hotel. I didn't pull it out of the dumpster myself, though.
I think that might qualify.
Yeah, maybe.
Very good. Very good. Hey, Tink, you know where we are right now?
Where are we?
Hiking hacks.
It's time for you to share some trail wisdom with our folks to make their next outdoor experience even better. What kind of wisdom do you have for us?
All right, hiking hacks or trail wisdom. So I think that we've talked about a little bit already that I can be a little bit of a bougie hiker when it comes to food. Something else I can be a little bit bougie about is hygiene and cleanliness. I hate, this is where you asked me if I was hiker trash, and I might not be, because I really hate smelling bad. And I hate like getting into my sleeping bag at the end of the day and my legs or my arms being dirty. So I very early on in my hiking career started carrying one of those little travel size, I call it a loofah, like a little bath sponge that you just buy in the travel department at any Walmart or Walgreens or whatever. And no soap, because leave no trace, but those things are super exfoliating. And at the end of a long hiking day, if you just wet it with plain old water, it takes like mud and dirt and grime and sweat off super well. And using that at the end of the day, just with some water to clean my legs and my arms off, made such a huge difference in the way that I felt going to bed. We've already talked about how important I think good sleep is, and then going to bed and waking up feeling rested in the morning. Going to bed clean was a very big part of that for me. So I guess my advice isn't necessarily to carry a travel loofah with you if you're going on a backpacking trip, but just that it's okay if your habits are maybe not exactly the norm. You don't have to be dirty and stinky all the time to be hiker trash. Maybe just some of the time.
Congratulations, Stacia. I've talked to 300 plus people on this podcast, and this is the first time the two words have gone together, travel loofah. That's amazing.
You think I'm crazy, but try it sometime. It weighs nothing.
It's mostly air.
It's mostly air.
Yeah. Okay. I don't doubt you, and I'm going to go look for a travel loofah next time I'm out.
Okay.
All right. So there you have it. We're just about done here. Hope our listeners enjoyed our time with Tink. Want to thank her for joining us this week. Stacia, how can our listeners keep up with you on social media, and where can they find updates on your latest adventures?
I am on Instagram at Adventure Like a Girl. I have a Facebook page of the same name and a blog also of the same name. Facebook
Consistent.
is it's just Adventure Like a Girl. And then the blog is adventurelikeagirl.com.
Okay. Remember to check out Hiker Trash Radio on social media as well. We're on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. And if you have comments or clips you want to share with me, you can send it to me at hikertrashradio@gmail.com.
Off the beaten path.
Now, unfortunately, Tink, we can't always be on the trail. And when we're not, we need to find a way to get our adventure fix. So, Stacia, I'm going to ask you to share some outdoor adventure media with our listeners to help them get by. This could be a book, movie, documentary. We call this segment Off the Beaten Path. I think you mentioned The Way a little bit earlier, but do you have any other recommendations for inspiration?
Yeah. Can I share a book and a documentary?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. We've already mentioned that I just got off of Mount Kilimanjaro, and we've already talked a little bit about how I think that there are often these perceived barriers to getting outside. And those barriers can be a lot of things. For people like me, it can be not seeing yourself represented in people who are doing the types of adventures that you want to do. Whenever I was planning to hike Mount Kilimanjaro, I was having a little bit of imposter syndrome, thinking that I'm probably going to be the biggest person on the mountain. Am I really going to be able to do this? I've never tried to do anything like this. I don't actually know if I'm capable of it. And I started looking for inspiration of people who looked like me who had done it. And once I started looking for that, I found it. So I found that in a book. The book title is Gorge, Gorge, by Kara Richardson Whiteley, I think is the author's name. And the book is about Kara's attempt at hiking Mount Kilimanjaro. She actually attempts more than one time, and she does ultimately make it as a nearly 300-pound woman who has a food addiction. So there is a little bit of a trigger warning with that. People who maybe struggle with food addiction or have a lot of sensitivities around talking about weight would maybe exercise caution reading it. But it's a phenomenal read that really showcases this woman's perseverance through something that she found excruciatingly challenging, but that was so important to her that she did ultimately achieve it. And then the other kind of
I think you're supposed to say spoiler alert about that she made it eventually. If someone waiting on whether or not that's going to happen, and now they know. So that's all right.
Okay, spoiler alert.
Okay,
sorry.
All right.
And then the other thing that I watched that kind of set me on this path to saying maybe this is something I can do is a documentary called Kili Big, which is about an entire group of plus size people who attempt to hike Mount Kilimanjaro. Spoiler alert, a lot of them don't make it, but some of them do. And I think the thing that I appreciated the most about this film is that I've touched on this a little bit in this interview already, that sometimes you don't have to finish the thing. I didn't finish the AT. Sometimes failing at it that's not the point. The point isn't that you didn't finish, and it's okay to sometimes set these really big, really hard goals and not quite get there. And that film really drove that home. These people set this huge, really hard, really difficult goal, and a lot of them didn't make it, and some of them did. And it talks a lot about kind of the emotions that go into choosing to give up on a dream, and then also the emotions that go into choosing to stick with it even through a lot of pain and discomfort. I found both of those to be a really interesting read and a really interesting watch for anybody who's interested, not even just in climbing Kilimanjaro, but in just outdoors in general.
Those are two outstanding recommendations. And you were a quick learner on the spoiler alert concept because you used it properly in the second example.
Yeah.
Well done. Well done.
I try.
What have we not asked you?
And before we wrap things up, just one more segment for you called What Have I Not Asked You That You're Dying to Tell Us About? What do we miss?
On top of all of my outdoor adventure stuff that I do that tends to make up a tremendous component of my personality, when I was on the AT, I felt like the trail community gave and gave and gave to me, and that I will probably spend the entire rest of my life trying to pay back that kindness in some way. And just earlier this year, my mom and I actually purchased 5 acres of land in Franklin, North Carolina, which is where I now call home, and hopefully where she will be calling home very soon. And we intend to turn it into a hiker hangout. of sorts. I'm not going to call it a hostel because I don't really want it to be that. It's not going to be a campground. It's going to be something for the trail community and a way to what I hope a way to improve the reputation of the town of Franklin in the trail community as the kind of place that is really welcoming to hikers and a place where people want to visit, a highlight of sorts of the trail. So that's something that I have in the works that I'm excited for, that is related to the outdoors, but isn't directly tied to any of my personal outdoor aspirations.
A hiker hangout. I love the concept.
Yeah.
Best of luck on that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hey, we are finished. I want to thank you for coming on the podcast, Stacia. We wish you the very best in that list of future adventures, and we'll hope you'll consider coming back on and telling some more stories after you've done some of those.
All right. It was great talking with you, Doc.
Thank you. And as we close up today, any shout outs to friends and family?
Yeah, I can do a couple shout outs. I've already mentioned my mom. I think that the number one question that I get asked whenever I'm off doing something super crazy, like trying to hike the AT or summiting Mount Kilimanjaro, is what do your parents think about that? I think a lot of people can relate to that. And my answer is always just, I've had resounding, unending support from my mom. Anything that I can think of, she's absolutely, let's do it. And I think that has probably gone a long way. She's never told me I can't. She's never told me I'm not good enough. She's never told me that maybe is something that you shouldn't do. It's always been you can do it. Let's make it happen. And I appreciate that I got really lucky in that regard. And my mom never tried to talk me out of any of it. And then I guess probably the other shout out I'm going to give is to my absolute best friend in the entire world. And actually she's my roommate, even though neither of us live in the house that we share. Annie, aka Mac, aka Honey Buns, who is a LASHer section hiker. She's actually currently at Pinhoti Days running a booth there and talking all about the Florida Trail, which is her pet project. And she is my sounding board and brings me back down to earth whenever my head gets way up in the clouds. So
it's awesome that you have two people like that in your life. So important.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Hey, thank you for tuning in. Always remember, the trail is the trail. It doesn't care if you want to go downhill. It doesn't care if it's almost dark and you're looking for a campsite. It doesn't even care if you can't seem to find that fire tower that has been lost to the mists of time. The trail is the trail. Embrace the suck.